So, good evening, everyone, and happy Halloween. My name is Suphasiri Jantawarin, and I'm the head of the Cognitive Psychology area in the graduate program in Psychological Science at the Faculty of Psychology, Chulalongkorn University here in Thailand. It is my great pleasure to welcome you to the Psychological Science special event, Insights on Memory and Beyond, a Q&A session with Professor Alan Baddeley. And this session originated from the initiative of one of our graduate students, Rabia Jan, who reached out to Professor Baddeley and invited him to meet with our academic community. And luckily, Professor Baddeley graciously accepted our invitation, making today's gathering possible. Now, our invited guest hardly needs an introduction. Anyone who has studied psychology or cognitive science has likely come across his groundbreaking work. We're truly honored to have with us today Professor Alan Baddeley, one of the most influential scholars in modern psychology. His pioneering research has fundamentally shaped our understanding of human memory and cognition, particularly through his multi-component model of working memory, which remains a cornerstone in the field. Professor Baddeley currently holds the title of Emeritus Professor of Psychology at the University of York. His outstanding contributions have been recognized through numerous honors, including being appointed Commander of the Order of the British Empire, election as a Fellow of the Royal Society, the British Academy, and the Academy of Medical Sciences, among many others. Today is therefore a rare opportunity for all of us to hear directly from Professor Baddeley, not only on his research on memory, but perhaps also broader experiences, reflections, and insights from a lifetime dedicated to studying psychological science. So without further ado, please join me in giving a warm welcome to Professor Alan Baddeley and to Arabia, our session moderator.
So,
Thank you
hello.
very much. Hello.
Yes. So, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you again for joining us today for such an excellent and once in a lifetime probably opportunity to have Professor Baddeley today with us. So, before starting, I'm going to share my screen. We have created some slides so that all of us could follow through. So, yes, I hope you guys can see my screen. Yes. So I'm Rabia again, and for the introductory session, I think there is nothing better for us to hear about today's session than to go through the very initial of what all of it started. And that questions is going to start with a more centered, the foundational view itself. So my question is directly to Ajahn or Professor Baddeley. Why did you choose to study memory?
Right. Well, can I actually move back from the slide? Because the slide actually happens quite a way through the talk. So can you remove the slide for the moment?
Sure.
Thank you.
Yes.
And I'd like to explain what I think I can and can't offer you. As you've heard, the invitation to talk to you came through an email correspondence with Rabia, which led to the suggestion, would I perhaps give a lecture? I'm now 91 years old and no longer give lectures, but what I do instead is question and answer sessions on working memory. And in fact, a lot of them are with schools within the UK. Working memory is one component of the high school pre-university topics. And so a number of schools will contact, and I find it's much better than my telling them what they should have already read. I get them to ask questions, and I get interesting questions, and they prompt me, and I interact with people and find that some of them are enthusiastic about what I've done. So that's much more fun. In this case, I forgot to actually suggest what my topic would be, assuming it would just be working memory, and was a little daunted yesterday to see that the topic involved insights and the future. I'm a rather pragmatic character. I come from Yorkshire in the north of England, which is more renowned for being down to earth than being romantic. And so I see myself as an experimental psychologist by trade. My theories I see as maps that are practical devices that pull together what we already know in order to allow us to use it and to ask questions about the future. It's not like some grand theory where you make a prediction, and if it actually, I preferred looking at Rabia than looking at myself, if I can move back to that. Good.
Here we go.
Yeah, sure.
It's easy enough to become self-conscious while giving a lecture.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
As I've discovered. Anyhow, so I see theories as practical. Testing them, I see as exploration, where you want to know what's over the next mountain, not as a firm prediction, where if you get it wrong, you abandon your theory. And I think a lot of people in science still think this way. And similarly in models, that you create a precise model. If the model is correct, you can make a prediction. If not, you ditch the model. Yes. Nobody actually works this way, but much more productive, I think, to accept that we are still at the exploratory stage of psychological science. And that's why I enjoy it. I like exploration. So basically what I'd like to do is to start by talking about working memory and using questions I've had from the past, from various sources, and essentially asking Rabia to ask these questions.
Yes.
Which prompts me to talk about them. If this happens, it's different every time. And I've got plenty to talk about. If I have a planned lecture, I've found many years ago when giving a lecture tour, by the time I'd given it several times, I wasn't listening and I was getting bored. So I think this is a much more fun for me, and I hope more interesting for you. After this first phase, there are a number of questions that have come in that are useful for actually explaining my views of the world, not so much in terms of telling you what's going to happen in the future or giving you inspirations, but saying, this is how I think of this. And a number of them come from neuroscience, neuroimaging, from clinical psychology. And these are areas I've interacted with. I don't claim to be an expert in them, and that there are no doubt people in the audience who know more about it than I do. And if there's time, I would be very happy to have further questions. But I'd like to make it clear that I'm not giving you the answers. I'm telling you about how I see the world.
Yeah, I think that will be helpful and fruitful nonetheless, having any kind of answers to inquiries or the work that you have done so far. So I think going on with the basic question of how did working memory came to be and the model itself came to be, I think it would be really great for us to go back and start from there itself.
Okay. Would you like to start with a question, or is that a general question?
Yeah, that is the general, more like the foundational questions regarding your work. So
okay, right. Let me let me ask one of the questions that kicks me off, that comes from students very often. Why do you study memory?
Yes.
And the answer is that I was paid to study memory. After I graduated, I had a year in the US and could have stayed to do a PhD, but I wanted to come back and do a PhD back in the UK. I loved psychology. I'd like to be a lecturer. But there were very few lectureships. It was a small subject, and it would be sensible to do a PhD first. But I didn't have a PhD position, but I expected to go in the army for 2 years. But by that stage, conscription was tailing off, and I was excused on medical grounds. So I was back in Britain, working as a hospital porter, then as a totally untrained teacher, one of the hardest jobs I've ever done. And eventually I got an offer to do a job at a place called the Medical Research Council Applied Psychology Unit in Cambridge, where I'd spent a summer before working as a research assistant. This would cover me to do a PhD, but it was paid by a grant from the British Post Office, which at that time included postal and telephones. And it was to work on the postal code, to develop a postal code with my boss, a chap called Conrad, who was an expert on short-term memory. And basically he said he would do the applied work. I should do something theoretical on postal codes, which was
interesting.
So I ended up with a rather broad topic of some psychological aspects of the coding of information, and floundered around for a while until my boss said, just do an experiment. Don't worry about it. Do an experiment and it will trigger things off. And I did, and it did. And I got involved in information theory and statistical structure of language, and generated postcodes for every town in the UK and sent to the post office, whereupon they said, thank you very much, but we've already decided. So I couldn't complain. I'd got my PhD. And my boss then went off to America for a sabbatical and passed me another project, which he'd come up with, which was to try to improve the capacity to evaluate telephone lines by moving beyond the simple task of having people hear and write down what they heard, but having them do something with the information. If you like, this is the seed of cognitive, the cognitive approach to working memory.
Yes.
So I was left with this and started with quite complicated designs where I had people talking to each other behind a screen and talking about different things, leaving me with lots of evidence that I couldn't actually analyze. So I decided I should keep it really simple. And I decided I'd use my boss's technique of presenting sequences of items. He used letters and numbers, but I'd use words. And I'd play against a background noise and see if memory was a sensitive measure. And so I had words that were similar in sound, which is what Conrad had shown, like man, mad, can, cad, cap. It's just similar. Pit, down, gay, etc. And play that against quiet or noise. And I thought I'd throw something else in, because my boss had claimed on the basis of this that there was a separate short-term memory that was acoustically based, but he hadn't demonstrated it. It couldn't be just a general effect of similarity, so I looked at similarity of meaning with words like huge, big, long, wide, tall, versus words that were different in meaning. Same thing again. I played it actually to a room full of 20 people through a loudspeaker. They wrote down their responses. It's quiet and in noise. And then waited didn't have to wait very long because I could test 20 people at a time.
At the same time, yeah.
And the results came out very clearly, but not in the way I expected. people did do slightly worse at hearing the similar sounding words, but it was a small effect.
Mm-hmm.
But their memory for them, once they'd heard them, was unimpaired. So this wasn't a patent way of testing telephone lines.
Mm-hmm.
What did strike me was the huge difference between similar and dissimilar, and the lack of difference between similar and dissimilar meaning. And that bought me a ticket into a major controversy at the time, which was, how many kinds of memory do we have?
Right.
Do we have separate long-term and short-term memory?
Mm-hmm.
And I could pitch in and say, yes, we do, potentially. But I then had to demonstrate that this didn't happen in the same way for long-term memory. So I simply increased the length of the sequences from 5 to 10 and ran them through several trials. When I did that, the whole result pattern changed, and similarity of meaning became all important, and similarity of sound unimportant. And that bought me a ticket. It also bought me a ticket to work on this. And my boss said, carry on with this. We'll pass the project on to someone else. And of course, if it had been a research grant, that couldn't have happened. But I was in a unit that combined basic and theoretical psychology. It was directed by someone called Donald Broadbent, who was one of the major innovators in cognitive psychology. And it was both a great place for applied and theoretical psychology. And I've spent subsequently on and off 30 years of my life in that. Actually 10 and then away and then another 20. And so it's bred in the bone that I like combining theoretical and applied work.
Right.
And the experiment I've just described answers one of the questions that I'm often asked. What's your favorite experiment? And it's really virtually it's not my first, because I did 17 in my PhD, as I had lots of time. But it's basically my first major experiment, and I still, as you can tell, still talk about it, because I really like it.
So did that kind of went on and begin the process of creating the working memory model?
It did, yes. So if I look back, I should say that Conrad actually invented it by inventing a proposal that didn't work.
Right. And yours did work and work really well.
Well, the model's built on things that don't work.
Yes, definitely.
Things don't work. They're telling you something about your ideas that are wrong. You're always disappointed because you thought you knew what was over the mountain, and it turns out that there's another mountain. But and sometimes it tells you that that wasn't a mountain at all, and you need to change your assumptions. But you don't abandon the map that you've already made. And so it's a very, very fruitful idea, and one that has paid off over the years.
Yes, it definitely shifted more towards sectioning memory itself, like from working then to short-term memory.
That's right. Well, at the time, the dominant model was one, the 1960s was a time when short-term memory was discovered, so to speak. In the 1950s, people tended to think that, well, memory is just one faculty. Then in the 60s, evidence seemed to suggest that there was another system that held information temporarily and then fed it into long-term memory. And there were lots of paradigms, different experimental demonstrations of this, which didn't really hang together and led to a gradual abandoning of the field. There was an important paper called "You Can't Play 20 Questions with Nature and Win" that suggested
Yes.
that this empirical approach wouldn't work, and that what one needed to do was to build complex AI models of complicated things like chess playing, and they would then tell you how the system must work. They were very ambitious and very effective as engineers at the time, but I think underestimating the complexity of the mind and the brain. But I have two sons who've got PhDs in AI, so I enjoy lots of discussions with them. Anyway, I'm rambling. At the time, I'd
So,
moved.
mhm,
I'd moved after
right.
8 years at the APU to a teaching post, and my boss, after a year or so, said, "Shouldn't you get a research grant?" Now, I'd never needed to get a research grant at the applied psychology unit, and he said, "Well, look, why not put in for a PhD student, no, a research assistant and a postdoc, and why not use one of the people that have been doing the MSc here?" And we had an MSc that was a conversion course from another degree into experimental psychology. And I chose to do so and contacted one of my master's students, Graham Hitch, who'd come from a physics degree in Cambridge and had gone back to the applied psychology unit and had done a PhD with Broadbent on short-term memory. And so we got together and we decided we'd ask the question, what does short-term memory do? What's it for? Is it useful? And we got some sketched out ideas on this, put the proposal in. They decided it was too expensive, but fortunately they cut the research assistant, not the postdoc. Otherwise, Baddeley and Hitch wouldn't have happened.
I'm glad it did happen.
So am I. We're still working together.
Oh, wow.
Absolutely. He's retired and I'm retired, but we meet in York from time to time and work on. Anyhow, we decided that we'd try to ask this question, and we wanted it to be a general answer. So we asked, we didn't want it to apply just to one experimental paradigm. We wanted it to apply to both memory, learning, and reasoning. And we decided we'd use a dual task technique, which is a method that we've used extensively ever since. And basically what we did was to agree that people disagreed on what tasks involved short-term memory and what didn't. But everybody agreed that digit span, remembering words, numbers of digits, used working memory. And so we argued that if we varied the number of digits that people had to remember, 392, 392, 392 versus 896, 95, that would use up different amounts of working memory, short-term memory. And if short-term memory was essential, by the time it had topped up, cognition should fall apart. So we did, and it didn't. Furthermore, when it didn't, we found that people could reason, they could remember prose passages, and they could learn verbal material while saying 796, 796. And that up to about 3 items, it didn't make much difference. It had an effect, but then from there on, it built up. And that seemed to suggest that the short-term memory itself had to be fractionated, had to be split. The one that we looked at was the verbal short-term memory using digit span, but in parallel, I'd been looking at visuospatial short-term memory,
Mm.
remembering patterns,
Yes.
finding that seemed to work as a short-term memory system.
Right.
And in the clinical domain, there's a test called the Corsi block tapping test that asks the visuospatial, and that involves an array of 9 blocks in front of the tester. He or she taps a sequence in order, and then patient taps and repeats it. And the span there tends to be about 5, and digit span is 6 or 7. So we've done work on visual working memory, and so we put together our first model, which had an attentional controller, which we call the central executive, which our first model looked like an egg and had 2 attachments, one verbal, where we had little arrows circulating round to represent the subvocalization, and the other had little arrows that moved to and fro to indicate that there was parallel processing.
So that were the first components of the working memory itself.
That's
But
right.
then you went ahead and added the episodic buffer later on.
That's right. The reason for this was that working memory was becoming much more fashionable. The first few years after our 1974 paper, it was hardly mentioned. And in fact, when we published the paper, we almost didn't, because we knew the model wasn't complete and we thought we should wait. But by chance, I got an invitation to submit a chapter to an annual review journal on memory and emotion, and accepted. And that took off. And working memory term took off.
Yes.
And we moved on to looking at the working memory in much more detail and finding that, for example, it could interfere with learning to read. So
Definitely.
looking at this proceeded from a lecture from a linguist, a psychologist, on dyslexia, developmental dyslexia, which seemed as though it might be explained in terms of the phonological loop. And Susan Gathercole, who just joined the unit at the time, and I found that there was a group of children within Cambridge who were selected as having this specific deficit. They had normal intelligence, but impaired reading. And we tested their phonological loop and found in due course that that was impaired, and went on from there to collaborate with people who knew about dyslexia and to link with people in our unit who were looking at developmental dyslexia, or not developmental dyslexia, but dyslexia following brain damage, of which there are a number of types. And we were able to demonstrate that the developmental type was different from the others, which you would expect in the sense that it interfered with acquisition of reading, whereas the other tended to interfere at different stages in what had already been acquired.
Right.
So we went on and carrying out various things. But one of the important papers that emerged during this period was the importance of working memory for intelligence, and high correlation with intelligence tests, and also the capacity to measure performance on working memory very simply by instead of using sequences of items, to have people remember sequences of sentences for which they had to simply remember the last word of each. So they would hear 5 or 6 word sentence, followed by another, then they'd recall each of them. And the capacity for that is limited to about 3 or 4 items. And that kicked off lots and lots of research, big time, particularly in the States. And to some extent, you could understand this, but because the capacity of working memory is supposed to be in terms of chunks of information.
Yes.
Thinking of chunks of information as sentences, the model we had couldn't hold a sentence or 3 sentences at a level that would allow you to remember the last word of each. It meant that you had to do something more complicated than that.
Yes.
And led to the concept of complex working memory,
Right.
which basically is a task that involves storing information, either visual or verbal or motor potentially, and also performing some manipulation on it. And that this is the crucial role. Now, it was unfortunately, it became clear at that time that our model couldn't do this. The systems didn't have a way of talking to each other other than through the central executive. And the executive was supposed to be an attentional system, not a memory system. So we need to have a fourth. And since we did it with 3 for at least 10 years, we thought adding a fourth was perhaps permissible. And so we added a fourth, but thought we needed to make it testable. Say that it's there, where that you push things you can't explain. It's not very productive. So we gave it a job. That was to bind together information. For example, information on sound and on meaning and on visual into chunks, and to make these accessible to the central executive via conscious awareness. So the conscious awareness was slipped in slightly because we didn't want to get embroiled in questions of had we explained consciousness, a huge swamp of a question in which many have drowned. So we slipped it in and focused on the binding.
Right.
And we tested this by blocking the various features, the phonological for binding into words, into sentences, the visuospatial for binding colors and shapes into objects, and the central executive for binding other things together. And what we found was that it wasn't doing binding at all, that the binding was happening off screen, so to speak. So it's much more like a screen on which the results of binding elsewhere was being projected than something that did the manipulating itself, which was, well, something of a setback. But we moved on to working with this further. The latest development has been prompted by the continued assumption that it did actually serve as a source of conscious awareness. And that had come from earlier work where myself and a postdoc at that time, Jackie Andrade, had looked at whether we could look at the role of working memory in the vividness of mental imagery. And we found that if you ask people to form images, visual image, for example, then you can interfere with it by having them move their eyes to and fro.
Yes.
But it wouldn't be much interfered with by articulatory suppression. If it's an auditory image, for example, a sequence of sounds, of tones, then vocal suppression and irrelevant speech interfered with it.
Right.
But we found that when it was an image from long-term memory, effects were present, but much less marked, suggesting that imagery can be fed from long-term memory, and that if it's visuospatial, it will imply this screen of consciousness, but that's not where the action is again. The latest development, where the episodic buffer came, the awareness buffer, actually came relatively recently with, I enjoy working with clinicians who are interested in cognitive psychology. And I've worked over the years occasionally on schizophrenia. And the appointment of a professor of clinical psychology in my department who worked on hallucinations seemed to be an interesting possibility. And so I contacted him and went in and we chatted. And I came up with a working memory interpretation of hallucinations that actually placed the hallucinations in the what used to be the episodic buffer, which we're now calling the awareness buffer, because it's necessary for conscious awareness. So it's actually coming out from under the undergrowth and saying, yes, we do believe this. This is what actually secretly we've assumed. For, sorry, how are we for time? Okay, right.
We still have time, no worries.
Okay. Well,
I think it's getting interesting.
We're nearly at the end of that stage.
Yes.
Talk about applications and so forth. Okay. So this is still unpublished.
Right.
We're working on it at the moment. But
you're getting a rare insight into what new models can come.
Absolutely, yes. Yeah. So basically, the argument says that hallucinations occur are. Now, I need to take a step back. There's a massive literature on hallucinations.
Definitely.
And that I'd previously been interested in the effect that voices in schizophrenia might involve the phonological loop. And there was work that suggested to some extent that it was, but that it wasn't altogether satisfactory. And that in fact, some patients said they could still hear the voice, even though they're suppressing articulation. And that reminded me that there's a whole area of the phonological loop that is concerned with hearing, what we call the inner ear and the inner voice.
Auditory.
That's right. That we, in a sense, discovered through work on reading, where requiring subjects to suppress articulation while reading or making judgments, articulatory suppression wouldn't prevent people from making judgments of homophony, even though two words are written very differently, eight the number, and eight to eat. They could make that, they could decide that they were the same, and they could judge whether they were different or not, suggesting that they could hear what was going on, even though they weren't saying it. Now, that opened up a huge area, which we were already very busy, and which we'd already had one toe in that, which was some another effect, irrelevant sound effect, which this was discovered by a visitor, Pierre Salome, who visited the unit, who was doing a doctorate on effects of sound on cognition, and had a year to spend with us. And I didn't think it would have much effect because of my earlier stuff on telephone lines. He thought it would, but we agreed that an interesting experiment would be to look at the effect of irrelevant sound on different types of material, and to look at different sounds. What we already was known was that if you try to ignore irrelevant speech, it will reduce your digit span, your spoken digit span, even though it's presented visually.
Right.
And even though this is in a foreign language, so Arabic in this case.
Arabic.
Yeah, and even if it's in semantically similar words, but phonologically similar does interfere. And some work going on with an ex-postdoc of Donald Broadbent's, Dylan Jones, had been looking at this area and disagreed with us.
Right.
And led to a controversy that lasted the whole of his life, basically.
Oh,
Lots of other things as well. He's a very good applied psychologist.
right.
And eventually, when I came up with the episodic buffer idea, I contacted him and said, yeah, maybe I agree with you. But by that stage, he'd abandoned his earlier theory.
Oh,
And attempt to explain everything in terms of both acoustics and output with no memory involved at all. So
right.
it brought me back into this whole area, and I must rewrite this part of the phonological loop at some stage. But it pointed out that our research on the loop had been dominated by the fact that articulatory suppression is such an easy manipulation and such a powerful manipulation and affects things cleanly that we focused on it and ignored the harder question of the acoustic image, which I will probably still ignore, but maybe I think actually no, because it's clearly this that's going to be at least partly important for schizophrenic auditory hallucinations, where as I've done previous work attempting to apply the working memory to schizophrenia, with the idea that maybe the frontal lobes are involved in delusions, and working with a colleague who had access to patients and talking to them about their delusions and testing their working memory and predicting, would their working memory show executive deficit? No. If anything, they were slightly better.
Better than.
And what has convinced me, and it's probably not a very original insight, but they were just trying to make sense of some very strange experiences. And,
Right. So that is the updated right now that you have given us the figures of how you kind of went and renamed the episodic buffer as awareness buffer.
That's right. So I'm at the moment trying to write something with my colleagues
Right.
for a psychiatry journal, working memory and hallucinations,
I
and
think.
hoping that he will start work, hopefully with some students, on developing an approach. And then my other colleague who does work on inner speech and inner experience, and
Mhm.
very experienced. So I'm hoping that we can spur this aspect of working memory to start, not in conflict, but as a way of bridging the gap. This is perhaps rather grandiloquent and overambitious, but much of psychiatry still depends on phenomenology, subjective report.
Mhm.
And none of the experiments, sorry, the explanations really,
Mhm.
actually tackle that. And that's exactly what the awareness buffer is supposed to do.
Right.
So if we can find ways, and we already have been finding ways of
Mhm.
interfering with the awareness buffer, either positively or negatively, then it potentially gives a way into perhaps treating hallucinations.
That is a research gap I think all of us can make note of.
Yeah,
And it certainly is going to be really applicable within this field and working memory in itself.
yeah. It already is applicable in
Yes.
some of the areas I'm going to be asked to talk about.
Yeah. So that, um, do you want me to show the figures considering it is yet to be
Yes,
published?
yes, yes. Why not? It'll be a retrieval rehearsal.
Right. I mean, our
Yes.
audience could have a bit of a peek.
No, show them.
Yeah, sure. It seems like we've changed. That was the previous original one.
Yeah, this, if we keep this one up, the original version was
Right.
the visual spatial sketchpad and the phonological loop, just the three with the Easter egg on top. The episodic buffer was invented and put between them, and it's clear that these all link to long-term memory. They also, of course, lead to perceptual input, and that's not on this one. So we move on to the next one.
Yes.
When you look in more detail,
Mm-hmm.
the idea of fractionation still works and is still important, and makes life much more complicated.
Right.
So under this, the idea is that there is a flow of tributaries of information into the visual spatial sketchpad that combines the visual, the spatial, the haptic and kinesthetic, which perhaps flow together before then, and come together in what we talk about as the visual spatial sketchpad, which is more multidimensional than that.
Right.
In logical loop, we now have not just speech, but also sign language, which my boss Conrad has demonstrated can be hugely important in learning to read, and if you're congenitally deaf. And he's had a major influence on deaf education in that respect. And similarly, work on effects of music and sound, where we've done a little work ourselves, and where there are starting to be working memory and music models. And of course, the articulatory loop shouldn't be forgotten, just because it's dominated for so long. So if we move on, all right, this is the latest,
Right.
the hourglass model.
Mm-hmm.
This hourglass figure basically tries to pull together the whole field in a simple form. One of the personal insights of trying to think about our model was that the working memory limitations are very present in trying to think about models and to develop models. And if you get much more than 2 or 3 items interacting, it becomes very difficult. So one of the benefits of using a system of breaking systems into components is that you can hive them off and not try and contact everything at the same time, but that you need to have a way in which they are potentially linked, and that some aspects will link some levels, but not all levels, and that you can't expect to combine all of them at once and have a viable model that will make specific predictions. So it's a way of dividing and thinking about. So what we have are long-term memory systems, which by semantics, I mean not just linguistic semantics, but knowledge of the world, knowledge of the visual world, all the knowledge we have that can feed into the awareness buffer.
Right.
I can be aware of what I'm saying, but I can say it without paying attention to it. Similarly, the perceptual and motor systems feed into the more complex figure that we had before, all the things that feed into the sketch pad and the loop. And the whole of this is manipulated. This is basically just memory.
Right.
Central executive is the attentional control system. We started with our first model. We chose to work on memory because we thought the attentional system would be too difficult. And we were right. At that time, there were quite advanced models of perceptual attention, but only one model of attentional as the control of action. And that was one by Norman and Chalice, which basically assumed two types of control. One, habitual control from habit patterns, and the other from what they called the supervisory attentional system, which could manipulate and bias this. So our central executive, we think of as a supervisory attentional system. So this is the current model, which we hope will come out. We've got an agreement for submitting a paper to TICS and another paper to the Lancet Psychiatry on the basis of an abstract. Whether they'll accept it is another matter, but fingers crossed.
That is an interesting shift in the model now that we have the perceptual motor system. There's a lot of groundbreaking things that's happening in this model.
That's right, and I'm 91, so I don't have a lot of time.
Oh no, why not?
The more I can tell about it, the better.
So yeah, that's been an excellent journey of you going through the basics, going to the foundational view of working memory itself, and now giving us an update on what is going to happen and what we can look forward to. Considering we don't have a lot of time left, and I'd like to go through some of the questions our audiences sent in. So maybe we can get through them. If you have longer, we can go through them more. But
no, I've got plenty of time.
Oh, then that's great. I think all of us are.
And you could just switch off if you're. I suppose you can't, but.
Oh, I think all of us are eager to hear your answer to the questions that's come in.
I think we also welcome questions from the audience during this point. If anyone has questions, please type them into the chat and then we'll be sure to address them during this session.
Right. So going to the first question that I think that's been that our audience has been really interested in is, what is your take on repressed memories? Although it is a really controversial topic in the realm of psychology, is there any substance to the claims that people repress traumatic experiences and hence cannot remember them?
Yes, I think in cognitive psychology, it's not controversial anymore. My memory text has two co-authors, one Michael Heitzink and the other Michael Anderson. And Mike Anderson has built a very well-developed career on demonstrating at a very detailed level that memories can be suppressed and the conditions under which this occurs. So I'm sure that is the case. Exactly what those are is complex. I refer you to our recently published text, Memory, which Mike has several chapters on this, and I have several chapters. It's rather fat, I'm afraid, but I can recommend it.
Right.
As unbiased.
But I think that it could answer some of the questions that our audience have sent, and certainly on the repressed memories. And the next question is also related to repressed memory, or rather the complex trauma or complex PTSD that someone might have. And how can trauma and PTSD be healed effectively using cognitive psychology and memory-based approaches? Do you have any case study or an example that could have used these methods?
I don't, but there are extensive case studies, particularly by two people. Jackie Andrade, she and I did the work on the vividness of imagery and the extent to which it can be disrupted. I had done work previously on disruption of visual memory by eye movements. And we had a visit from an Australian clinical psychologist who told us about eye movement desensitization treatment for PTSD and intrusive memories. And the original treatment, I gather, involved waving a finger to and fro and following it. This seemed to fit into our work on working memory very effectively. And we tried it out using pictures that are either peaceful or threatening and got rather minor effects. But then when we asked subjects to use personal memories of stressful events from their own life, then we got real effects coming through. And Kavanagh, who went back to Australia, has extended this. And Jackie Andrade, who's now at the University of Plymouth, has worked on this for several years now, applying it to craving, to being, in a sense, having your mind disrupted by a craving for food, for example, or even things like a craving for wanting to play hockey because you can't wait because you're so keen on it. And has developed methods using working memory and combining it with behavioral methods, because I think behavioral methods are very good at controlling the output, the behavior modification, and the combination of these has been very effective. And she's done work on slimming, for example, where the method has been measured in number of pounds lost and extent to which they're lost over a long period, because it's a method that can be used in order to suppress. Similarly, work on PTSD has done by Holmes, who is now, I think, in Stockholm, showed that you can take advantage of the fact that if a memory is retrieved and recalled, then it becomes vulnerable to suppression. And she has used eye movements involved in a computer game where you have to move blocks and they drop down, and shown that if patients have the you could use if necessary, the concurrent method to make the image less vivid, and then when it's evoked, suppress it by using the computer game. So these are both areas that are effectively being developed. Another area that indirectly came from working memory is mindfulness training. I became interested in emotion because of doing research on divers in the open sea. I was a keen diver and thought it was a nice way of getting my holidays subsidized by the Medical Research Council. Found out that the effects I was working on nitrogen narcosis, effect of depth on air breathing. Basically, if you dive to 30 meters or more, you become slightly drunk. And this had been demonstrated in the pressure chamber, but as part of the Cambridge University diving group, we went off to the Mediterranean, demonstrated this in the open sea, and then failed to replicate it a little later. And hypothesized that the difference was that the first one was out in the middle of the open sea and you went down, you were sure that there was a bottom down there, whereas the other one you swam in from the side. And that proved to be the case. And a third experiment carried out off the Scottish coast, where it was much more anxiety provoking, reinforced that. But I've become interested in memory and the effect of anxiety on performance. Did some work on free fall parachuting, which turned out to be a not very convenient way of studying anxiety. And then persuaded the Medical Research Council to allow us to set up a section of our unit that involved clinicians who are interested in cognitive psychology. And one of those was someone who was interested in depression and rumination. And we ran some earlier studies using articulatory suppression and various other means of abolishing rumination, and discovered that what seemed to be important was not that something had to be imposed all the time, but that there had to be enough to break up the ruminative thoughts. He moved on to use a more complex model than mine, that is less based on the detail, and with other colleagues developed this and is interested in meditation to develop the mindfulness. And together with someone in Canada, they did I think some of the classic studies in this area, and this is, I think, quite influential in the area of depression and much more widely. So I can't claim to have originated that, but I suppose I can claim to have attracted him to the unit. As he was working in a unit in Oxford that was closing, and one option was to transfer to my unit. And he seemed very reluctant because he was basically behaviorally inclined. But he changed his mind, and I asked him afterwards why. And he said, well, you said I could do what I wanted to do. And I suppose what he wanted to do was what I wanted to do.
Right. That is some insightful answer to this question. So moving on to the next question. So given that the central role of working memory in cognitive neuroscience research, how do you see their boundary evolving? particularly with the finding that shows an overlapping between attention, long-term memory, and working memory processes. So the question kind of goes on and emphasizes that the working memory capacity predicts so many cognitive outcomes. But why? Is high working memory capacity really about storage, or is it more about attentional control, inhibition, or something else entirely?
That's a good question. The answer is that our working memory model has been based on the memory aspect because that we thought was tractable, but always bearing in mind the attentional. And certainly a lot of our more recent work done with Graham and Richard Allen has been the more detailed control of working memory and the more attentional aspects. But what are the boundaries? I think of them less of boundaries than of links. So a boundary suggests that this stops here. So I think of them as geographically rather than in terms of property. So some things link very clearly and not. They overlap. One of the joys of the working memory model is its flexibility, that it tries to establish firm outlines. What are the mountains? What are the rivers? Where is the lake? And then extend them. And some people like to look in detail at what's in the lake and so forth. Others like to place it in another context. But I think of them as a series of maps that hopefully will map onto each other, but not to worry too much, particularly, if the educational doesn't map onto the, well, it might map onto neuropsychology, for example, but not necessarily to the more visual aspects of working memory. And so earlier ideas of dyslexia as word blindness probably turn out not to be a good idea because perhaps surprisingly, phonology turned to be more important. So high capacity is about the interaction between working memory, attention, inhibition, and storage. But it's what we can look at. And that's why it's called working memory, and why working memory is different from attention. Why working memory is different from education and so forth. So it is the reason for not emphasizing this, because it suggests that attention is different, which it isn't. It's the territory on which attention can be applied and manipulated. And it's a territory that we're increasingly able to understand. And the fact that it's still around after 50 years suggests that we've probably got something right.
Yes, I mean that does kind of makes us shift back and think that there is more rather linkages than boundaries. So,
Absolutely.
but coming back to the next question. So in 2022, Shinji Nishimoto from University of Osaka used diffusion model to recreate images viewed by participants from fMRI scans. So with the AI's ability to reconstruct these visual scenes from neural activity, how might this technological advancement change our theoretical understanding of human memory system? Can AI be viewed as an extension of the episodic buffer?
Well, first of all, I think this sort of technological development can potentially provide a very useful tool. But as far as it demonstrates that the information is contained within these images, which in a sense is a proof of existence. and it says something about the images, tells you something about the tool. Doesn't necessarily tell you that they're crucially important. Is it an extension of the episodic buffer? No, I think
Can like
the idea of that the extent that how to express this. The episodic buffer is a way of thinking about things.
right.
This demonstration is a demonstration of a tool, a very useful tool, that has, gee whiz. It doesn't therefore mean that it maps on to the way that it happens in the brain, let alone in the detailed aspects of the working memory model. So I think that, and AI and so forth, we should keep an eye on them and try to learn from each other, but not jump too much to think, oh, what we need to do is build a better technical mathematical model or a better scanner. And I think a lot of money, has been wasted on trying that approach to understanding memory. The idea that the finer the grade of analysis, the better it will be. For something like working memory, it's much more concerned with interaction across systems. And so while detailed analysis may be important for something like visual perception, something like working memory, no, I think simpler systems are more appropriate. And I think we've made much more progress using EEG and measuring white body connections between the various regions.
Right. So coming back to the biological aspect. So if we were to look for the anatomical position of the central executive, which brain anatomy would you suggest that we dive into?
Well, there are two two answers to this.
Right.
The first is that we've known this since the early neuropsychology days, confirmed by early PET imaging, that the phonological loop is in the left hemisphere between Broca's area and the temporoparietal junction. The visuospatial sketchpad involves several areas, of which most are right hemisphere, and the central executive is principally the frontal lobe. Now, where it gets complicated is that when you try to look in more detail, because particularly in a concept like working memory, it's about what areas interact with other areas. And very recently, some, I think, very nice work being done by Sugathako's group back at my old unit, although she's now retired, on developmental disorders, has shown interesting neuroimaging measures of white matter rather than grey matter. As I understand it, the grey matter is the substance of the cortex, and the white matter are links between these neurons that link different areas of the brain, and that essentially working memory is a system that depends crucially on these communications. And interestingly, they're commenting that there seem to be hubs within these systems that I think would be very interesting to investigate.
Right. So that really goes back to a more study of the brain. So what aspects of memory or cognitive research today excites you the most? And where do you think the next big theoretical leap will come from?
Well, I suppose if I were, in terms of memory, leaps sometimes come from new technology, and I'm an explorer. I'm happy to use technology. I'm skeptical about it necessarily being useful, and also it's not my bag. I'm not particularly good at machines and things. But what I would do, I think, the big question is that of energy. And cognitive psychology doesn't really have a concept of energy, since probably Broadbent used arousal, but that's too non-directed. And yet it's very important, both from an individual point of view. I can remember very vividly having food poisoning when I was visiting colleagues, and after a thoroughly miserable night, my host ringing and saying, "I'll come over and keep you company. You must be desperately bored." Saying, "I don't have the energy to be bored." And I'm very easily bored. So, and also as individuals, the individuals with drive, which is very important, and energy. And if you've got no energy, if you're feeling down, you don't do very much. And
Definitely.
I think this would be a very interesting area to study, even from the very, very basic level upwards. And if I were to start, which in fact I've just started, I'd look at COVID, because it's something where a large number of people who were previously healthy, some of them have energy problems, and some of them have brain fog problems. So I discovered someone in my department who's working on that, and we're at the moment trying to develop a measure of brain fog and energy. And so that's my latest enthusiasm. Anything like that will take 10 years. So by the time we find, well, no, we could find it doesn't work. We will find it doesn't work very quickly, but not that it ultimately doesn't work. But by the time it does work, I'll be long gone.
Oh, no, you'll be here.
No, I've had a wonderful life.
Yes, but I hope we can hear about it directly from you.
Yeah.
Yeah. So building on that, so again, what is your most current, most puzzling conundrum concerning human memory?
I don't know.
Really?
I suppose I tend not to think of conundrums.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, there are so many things we don't understand.
Right.
The secret is to find something that we don't understand, that given our current methods, we've got a chance of understanding, and that's worth understanding. Otherwise, there's a temptation to do experiments about experiments, and we take in our own washing, so to speak. So X demonstrates this effect, and Y disagrees slightly, and Z then. And the journals tend to encourage this. They seem to want theoretical significance for every paper, and so you have to invent theoretical significance, and then it doesn't replicate. Anyway, so conundrums. No, I'm off conundrums.
I mean, that is a new
I'm
perspective.
I'm all for brain fog at the moment.
But that is an interesting perspective to look at things.
Yeah.
Right. So the next question is, if you were starting your research career now with the modern neuroimaging and computational tools available, what question about memory or executive control would you most want to explore?
I'm really not up to all of the methods and so forth of neuroimaging. The 3 occasions when I've tried to become involved, one was via the Medical Research Council, who was in touch with a chap who clearly didn't want to collaborate. The second was someone in the University of Pittsburgh who then changed their job. And the third was in the Karolinska Institute in Sweden, where they had a new imaging system that turned out to have a major fault in its software. So I think I'm not designed for computational and neuroimaging tools, but I love talking to people who are using them. So I love talking to my sons about AI and pointing out that our brains are still a lot better than that. And that the claims that they've almost solved it, I've been arguing against for at least 50 years. But so I pass on this one as well.
So we might have a chance at having that collaboration.
Yeah.
So the next advice is more about the future. So what advice would you give to future scientists in the field of cognition and neuroscience if they were interested in memory and every aspect of it?
I think the advice would depend crucially on what they were interested in and what methods were available and what methods might become available. And is it a question that has some future, in that it'll last for a little while and not just the fashion of the moment? Because it's very tempting for topics to become fashionable and methods to become fashionable. And that's useful in a way, because it means that if it genuinely is a potentially useful method, lots of people jump in and try to use it, and you find out what its limitations are. In that respect, our dual tasking method was fortunate in that it wasn't popular and people didn't do it because it's quite tricky, and there would have been lots of failures to replicate. But the most important thing in research in general, I think, is to do it because you enjoy it and you're interested in it, and do it to the best of your ability, and enjoy it, and not worry too much about how you compare with someone else. If you can get someone to pay you to do it and you enjoy it, that's good. And if it excites you, then carry on.
That certainly is an invaluable advice. I mean, all of us currently should focus on excitement. So the last question is, again, what are the advice as a whole you would give to psychology students who are starting off?
Yeah. The advice I would give is that I think people often start with the assumption that you'll become a clinical psychologist. I started with that assumption, having read a book called The Inner Experiences of a Psychoanalyst, and rapidly developed an interest that convinced me that experimental psychology was much more interesting than Freud, because you could actually find out whether you were right or wrong. So what I think you would get from a psychology degree is the sheer breadth, and it's going to vary from department to department, but it requires you to study a wide range of topics at a range of different levels, both the social, the epidemiological and statistical, the cognitive, the neuro, and the emotional. It requires you to develop an understanding an evaluation of statistics, even if you don't necessarily end up where you actually need the statistics. You won't be able to evaluate statistics that you read in the press, which are often easily misleading. And that it leaves you potentially able to do a wide range of jobs, some of which are clinical and maybe well paid and interesting and exciting, but others in other areas where your skills and ability to understand statistics, to write, to think, and to discuss ideas should provide a useful background for a whole range of further careers. So don't worry too much about one particular, unless you really want to do that, then fine, go ahead. But if one door closes, there are other doors that are likely to be open to you. So I think it's a good thing to study psychology.
Definitely. I mean, I did started off thinking I was going to be a clinical psychologist, and now I'm into cognitive psychology. So that is an invaluable advice that you have given. So I think that wraps up all the questions that we have gotten from our audience. And now if there is any more questions in the audience that they'd like to ask, they can go ahead. So
Feel free to type into the chat or even unmute to speak to Professor Baddeley directly.
Yes, I think I found one question here. Oh, Ajahn Pira.
Ajahn Pira can go first.
Hi, thank you. Hi, Alan Pira, former student of Robin Morris. I did my PhD at King's.
Oh, right.
Yeah. So I actually, hi. So I really want to did my PhD with you, but because you no longer accepted PhD student 12 years ago, so I end up with working with Robin Morris at King's IOP.
Oh, well, good.
Yeah. Yes. So I'm still.
Are you still in touch with him?
Yes, I'm still working with Robin, but about working memory and aging populations.
Wow. Do give him my best regards. And,
Thank you. So just want to let you know that I'm still working on working memory field, and I use EEG. So I use EEG to focus on central executive and explore the energy level and attentional resources allocation. So yeah, just to let you know.
Well, this is actually an area in which, if I were moving, it would be EEG, because it's close enough to the concepts and we understand it. And I think it's not a question of having fancier and fancier equipment. It's a question of knowing how to use equipment and linking them. And so, yes, if I was starting, I would in fact choose that area.
Thank you.
We have a raised hand by Sanvi. Is that right? Did I say your name right?
Yeah. Hello, Mr. Allen. I'm Sanvi. I'm currently a high school student. I'm in grade 12. Thank you for your work, and your work has really inspired so much of what we study right now and possibly even in the future. When I was studying the working model, I had this tiny question that do emotional states like anxiety or stress affect the efficiency of different components of the working memory?
That's a good question that I've been trying unsuccessfully to answer for many years, but not very directly. My work on divers triggered that. And I found it difficult. It's as if in dangerous situations, people can pull themselves together and resist the stress. I think where stress is habitual and continual, it becomes much more disruptive, and which is why I moved to encouraging the development of a clinical group in the unit, which is still flourishing. But I can't answer the question. I think it's important, but I can't give you the answer. There may well be people out there who can, because there's a lot to keep up with.
Thank you for your insights.
So
is there anyone else from the audience who would like to ask Professor Baddeley anything?
Okay.
All right, so if we don't have any more questions, then I will be closing this session. First of all, thank you so much, Professor Baddeley, for sharing your valuable time with us today. It has been a true privilege to meet you and to hear directly from someone whose work has really shaped the foundation of how we understand memory and cognition. And we wish Professor Baddeley continued good health as he continues to develop his models, publish papers, and inspire scholars all around the world. And thank you to Rabia for taking the initiative to make it happen and for being our excellent moderator for today. And for all our audience, thank you so much for joining us and for submitting such thoughtful questions. My apologies that the session ran a bit longer than expected, but we really appreciate your presence here with us. And I think this event reminds us how powerful it can be to connect across different generations of researchers. So to not only learn about the great theories, but the stories, the experiences, and the curiosity that drive that scientific discovery. So if you would like to hear more talks like this, we invite you to stay connected to our program and faculty social media pages, where you'll find updates on future events like this, and we can have more opportunities to explore the evolving landscape of psychological science together. So we really look forward to welcoming you in our future talks. So again, thank you so much, Professor Baddeley. We've kept you here long enough. We wish you all the best, and thank you so much for joining us today in our community.
And thank you very much for inviting me and for being such a good audience.
Thank you so much,
again.
Professor. Have a good day. It was great meeting you. Take care.